So when I was asked to do this, I immediately started thinking, well, what do I think about global citizenship? And what exactly does that mean? And I think that without going to the dictionaries and various sources, I immediately think of being part of something, being part of some larger community. And when we generally think about citizenship from a national level, we think of the problems of who gets to be a citizen. And as soon as you draw any kind of boundary, there are those that are inside and those that are outside. So the nice thing about looking at from the perspective of global citizenship is to some extent you try to remove those boundaries. But even then, when we start to think about citizenship, I worry about my constant perspective or my location from a position of privilege, and that I even have the luxury to be sitting here and discussing this. And so I guess, I mean, the question of what I get to say, what knowledges in the world are privileged, what voices in the world are privileged, what ways of knowing in the world are privileged, all of that leads me to, I mean, if there's one thing that's overriding in all of what I will say, I think it's grounded in a sense of absolute uncertainty. I do not have any answers. I've certainly made lots and lots of mistakes. And so when I was thinking about how I wanted to speak about this, I thought, yes, I can share some of the things that I've done in the class, but more than anything are the overriding questions that I still struggle with. So I'll just quickly go through them. And yes, I'll do a little bit of reading off this. The first question, how do I balance community interests, concerns with global international concerns? And I've worked on many international boards. I've worked with Change for Children, Aina Mbazi. And you know, I'm constantly encountering this question. Well, even within school administration, you know, we don't want to put any, like, we'd much rather raise funds for what's going on here than what's going on in Uganda or Nicaragua or Zimbabwe or wherever. And that's a real question, because I think there is some validity to that. And it's really hard for me to say. I mean, I've had a great deal of privilege and opportunity to have traveled a lot in the world and spending time in many, many different countries and many different communities. It's hard for me to convey that poverty is not poverty is not poverty, and that every issue is very different. I guess my tentative answer to all of this is that I try to do both. I try to connect both and connect issues with our own Indigenous peoples, for example, with the struggles in Latin America or with the struggles of various tribal groups in Africa. I try to do work in inner city Edmonton, as well as work with some of the squatter communities, say in the Philippines.
How do I evolve to become a global educator? So throughout my sort of career teaching kindergarten, I have been very lucky. I never followed the curriculum. For the first quarter of my teaching career, there wasn't a curriculum, so I did whatever I want. So I had really a privilege of teach what I think the hidden curriculum is. And I always follow the lead of my children. If I have one little girl or one little boy come up and say whatever issue is in their mind, I would quickly say, oh, I know social study covers neighborhood, math, I have to do square. And I wish I have a dark in my classroom of all the curriculum. I would say, got that one, got that one. Then I bring it all together exactly like you said. I integrate everything. But then in the 80s, we did have a sort of recommended curriculum for kindergarten. So I sort of have to follow that. But at the same time, I always start with, I'm so glad to see the literature at the back. I always start with a book. And you know how kindergarten sit together and we share a book, unlike the high school. And there's always one very intellectual. I just admire these 4 or 5-year-olds. We come up with the most philosophical question. And that's when I bring in the global ed and the environmental ed. But most people say, a 5-year-old? Honestly, a 5-year-old can think critically? Well, those are the people that I think don't listen to the 5-year-old very often. Global ed is really a way of approaching everything I teach, approaching life. I would even consider global education as the way you live, the way you see each other. I don't just teach children how to encode and decode and crack that alphabetical code. I really do feel I teach the children how to read the world.